Now you're going to stop it.
You can start.
Hello, my name is Major Gregory H. Arabian. I'm the director of the Oral History Project for Post-41 AMVETS in Watertown, Massachusetts. The date is June 17, 2002, and we're here today taking the oral history of one of the comrades of our Post-41 Corporal Paul S. Masubian AMVETS post. And we have today with us AMVET John K Garabedian, and he is in Belmont, and he's been a long-time member of our post. John, how are you?
Good, Gregory. How are you?
Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about your history,
All
your
right.
military history, and your experience with the post, and how you felt about your military experience and post-military experience. First of all, can you tell us where were you born and raised?
I was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1931, and I was raised in Boston.
And is it from Boston that you went into the service?
Yes, I went into the service March of 1953 while the Korean War was going on, and I was honorably discharged in March of 1955.
And before you went into the service, did you have, let me see here, you say that you were, how old when you went into the service?
I was probably about 22 or so.
Okay, so you had a little bit of education. You were a high school graduate?
Yes.
And did you have any, what kind of educational background did you have beyond high school?
I was a licensed electrician when I got out of high school. Before I went into service, I also started going to Mass College of Pharmacy in 1952, and I had gone 3/4 of a year where I was activated since I was a member of the Massachusetts National Guard from 1950 to about 1953 when I was activated.
I see. So you were activated during your job as an electrician?
Yes.
And you were going through the Mass College of Pharmacy to be a pharmacist?
Right, and that was my first year.
What led you into pharmacy? Didn't you like being an electrician?
I like being an electrician. My mother always wanted me to be a pharmacist because we had relatives that were in pharmacy. So I told her I'd go to school and oblige her with that.
Okay. And where did your mother and father come from?
My mother was born in Turkey, Dikranagad, Turkey, and my father was born in Chermug, Turkey. And they both came to the United States after their mother and father, both sides were murdered by the Turks, and they came over. My father came over before the First World War, and my mother. Start off with my father.
Okay, so we're back to the point where your father came from Dikranagad?
No, my mother
Your mother
came from
Dikranagad, and your father came from Chermug.
Chermug.
Now, were they married when they came over to the United States?
No, neither one knew each other.
Okay, so they married in the United States?
They got married in the United States,
Okay,
right.
all right. And when did they come over?
Well, my father came over, I think it was around 1910, 1911, before the First World War. And my mother was in, and they killed his parents and family. And my mother was in the 1915 massacre where they killed her mother and father and 3 brothers. And she hid out, they had servants, so they hid in the barn of one of the servants. And when the Turks left, they started their march through the Syrian desert to Aleppo, Syria, and that was probably around 1915, 1916, somewhere around there. And she ended up in Aleppo, lived there for a year, and then came to France, where most of her relatives had lived in Lyon, France. And my father went over in 1930 and married her and brought her back. And I was born a year later in 1931.
Okay.
I'm sorry. There are some things that are coming up on the screen that I don't know what to do. Maybe I should shut the power off and shut it on again. Look at
What does
this.
it say?
When we moved it, when we came in and moved it,
Okay.
I must have touched one of the buttons. Maybe
All right,
if
well.
I shut it off and on, maybe it'll
No
go
problem.
back to a default setting, you know?
Yeah, why don't we just shut the damn thing
I
off?
just didn't.
All set? Okay, so you were born in France?
No, I was born in Boston in 1931.
Okay. And you went through the Boston schools?
I went to Charlestown High School in Boston for electricity, and that's how I became an electrician when I was at the age of 19 and 20. And then I started going to school in 1952 at Mass College of Pharmacy.
Okay.
And I was drafted or activated in 1953 because I was a member of the the Massachusetts National Guard, and
So you were not able to finish your education because of the outbreak of the Korean War.
that's right.
Is that it?
The Korean War had been going on, but because I was a member of the Massachusetts National Guard, I couldn't even get a 2-month deferment, so they took me in March instead of waiting until June so I could finish my schooling.
Okay. And did you go in with your unit, or did you go in separately?
No, I went in separately, and I ended up in an armored outfit when I went overseas in Germany.
Okay. So where did you take your, did you have to take basic training?
Basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey, where I went to field wire school. That's climbing the telephone poles and laying wire. And then they sent me down to Fort Knox, tank to armored radio school, and I went 3 months there. And from there, they shipped me to Germany through Bremerhaven, and I was stationed at Fulda, which was right on the East German-Russian border. And there,
That's Fulda, F-U-L-D-A?
F-U-L-D-A.
Yeah.
But they sent me to Morse Code School, which was in Darmstadt, about 15 miles south of Frankfurt, Germany. And then I went back to my outfit, which was in Fulda, and I stayed there the rest of the time until I came back.
Is that the 14th Armored Cavalry Tank Battalion?
Yeah, it was the 14th Armored Cavalry, exactly.
Okay. And now you were pulled into the service during the Korean War, but you ended up in Germany. Is that it?
Right. I ended up in Germany because just as I finished, I think my training at Fort Knox, Fort Knox in Kentucky, the war had just ended a day or two at that point. So they kept us there an extra week, and naturally people were coming back, so they had to ship us someplace, so I ended up in Germany, lucky for me.
Okay. And you were there from 53 to 55?
Right, March of 55.
So you were with a tank battalion.
Exactly.
And I would assume that you've had some experience in Germany with the Cold War going on over there.
Oh, yes.
And did you actually ride in the tanks?
Yeah, we rode in the tanks, and actually they taught us for a while how to drive the tanks. I knew how to do that. And we were on the gunnery range to fire, I can't remember, it was M36 tanks, whatever, and we fired shells on the range and so forth. And
what kind of tanks were you using during this period of time?
I can't remember. I think
it wasn't the old Shermans
no,
that they used in World War II.
Well, I can't remember. I think it was M31, M36. Yeah.
Okay.
Tanks.
What kind of firepower did you have on that? A gun and a machine gun?
Yes, they had machine guns in the front, and they had a cannon in the front, and I can't remember what size cannon it was. But
did you fire it?
We all got a chance to, all 5 members of the crew got a chance to fire it, yeah.
So you were a member of a tank crew, is that correct?
No, I wasn't a member of an actual tank crew, but we all had to know how to fire the weapons and how to drive the tank, and it was fairly easy to do that. I was a member of headquarters company, which basically serviced the tanks if the radio went out or whatever.
How
We
were
went
the
home.
communications in the tanks? Did they use, did they use, I assume they used wireless,
Yeah,
you know?
and
Tell us something about the communications in the tank.
well, they could communicate between each tank. There was wireless at that time, and we used to go on a lot of maneuvers along the East German border, and I'm sure we watched them like they watched us too through the binoculars. And I can't remember how many maneuvers. We'd probably go on a maneuver every 4-5 months, or maybe less. And
Was there any problem with them intercepting communications and you're intercepting theirs, or having them know what you were going to do next?
not that
Anything
I
like that?
was. They were probably notified that we were going to go on maneuvers, so they wouldn't get excited over there.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure they knew about that.
All right. So you actually spent the most of your time, over 2 years, in Germany.
Yes,
Okay.
about a
Did
year
you
and a
have any
half.
contact with the with the civilians in that area?
Oh yeah. We had contact with them. We used to go into town, and we used to wear our uniforms. And I also got a chance to travel to see my relatives in France, where my mother had stayed for 10 years. And
Is that in Lyon?
Lyon, France, and of course, when we traveled, we didn't wear our uniforms because it's too conspicuous, you know.
You did have to. You could go into town without your uniforms, or did you have to use your uniform? You have to wear a uniform.
No, you didn't have to wear your uniforms. Some of us chose to and some not. But when we went out of town, out of Germany, then we thought it was most people didn't wear their uniforms.
Why was that?
Well, I think it attracted too much attention. I remember one time when I was in Italy, we had, and we didn't have our uniforms on, and we had 4 or 5 men following us from behind. So I told my friend, I says, look, I says, I think these guys are going to jump us, because they knew that we're Americans. I asked one woman, I said, how can you tell if I don't speak to you if I'm an American or not? She says, we can tell very easily from the cut of your clothes and the fact that you wear Argyle socks. They could tell. And the Germans wore long pants, so sometimes it'd be dragging below their heels. And the Americans usually had well-fitting clothes, so they could tell.
Was there an anti-American feeling in Europe during that period of time? Is that why you didn't wear uniforms?
I think there was a slight anti-American feeling, especially in Germany. When I was there, I saw a lot of bombed-out areas, like in Cologne. They leveled it, and the only thing that was standing was the Cologne Cathedral and the train station, which I think they had rebuilt. Everything else going in and going out for probably 8-10 miles was rubble.
And they held that against you.
Well, I think they did, yes. Right.
And did you ever have any conversations with the local German population with regard
Yes,
to that?
and when I was going to Morse Code School in Darmstadt, we stopped off. It was either Darmstadt or Frankfurt. I stopped off in a local bar. There was an area, looked like a project, probably 3/4 of a mile long in length also too, and it was completely leveled. And yet I noticed that, yeah, it was Frankfurt. Most of the other buildings were all built up, but this was left like that. So I asked the bartender, I says, how come they haven't built this up? He says they left that as a memorial because he says one night during the war, I guess it was the British, had come over there, and as an act of revenge from what he said, because they bombed England a lot, they bombed this project, and he says 20,000 people lived there, and he said they did it purposely, but it was completely leveled, and 20,000 people lived in that project.
So no
And-
wonder there was some ill feeling there.
Oh, yeah.
How were your accommodations in Germany? Did you live in tents, barracks?
No, the
Okay.
accommodations in Germany were actually a lot better than they were in the United States.
Describe them for us.
They had nice barracks, and each room probably held 3 to 4 people. And their bathrooms had stalls in them and are separated, unlike Fort Knox, where they had 30 toilet seats on one side and 30 in the other, probably no more than 8-10 feet apart, and everybody, 60 men at the time, going to the bathroom, looking at each other, and my legs would be touching the other person's legs, and that's the way it was.
This was Fort Knox.
This was Fort Dix.
Fort Dix.
Yeah. I hopefully
that.
they've changed things since now, but the Germans, their barracks were nice. They were stone, built out of brick and stone, where the ones in Fort Dix are wooden shacks, basically.
So you were living in German accommodations.
Right.
That the Americans didn't have to rehab for you.
No.
I see. Okay. And where did you eat? How was the food and the dining accommodations there?
Well, we went to the mess hall. It's usual army food. They had steak now and then, which was tough as heck, and they had chips on toast, which was some type of porridge with meat in it. I ate there most of the times. A lot of the times I used to eat, there was a PX there, and especially the last couple of months, to make sure that I didn't get sick, I ate at the PX.
Right. Was there any problem with if you decided to eat in a local town? Was there any problem with regard to germs, water, or anything like that?
Actually, what we did was we used to go, there was a place called Hohenfeld, which was really off limits to the American soldiers, except if you were passing through it. And I guess some of the fellas in the outfit knew the butcher of the town and the guest house, and we went in and we would park the truck inside his yard so that the military police, when they went through, couldn't see it. And we used to eat schnitzel and so forth over there, and they did a very good job. And the waiter actually used to tell us about his war experience, and we saw all the wounds. He was on the German front, and then they shipped him to the Russian front, and he's lucky he was alive. He had a lot of wounds in his body. He's a nice fellow.
Now, you weren't married at this time, were you?
No, I was about 23, 24.
Okay.
I got married when I was 28.
And how did you maintain contact with your parents?
Oh, yes.
Did you call them or write to them? Or?
No, I wrote to them at the time, and they would write to me maybe once every 3 weeks or so.
Would this be in English, or would it be in Armenian?
No, it was in English.
In English.
Right.
Okay. And this was all longhand? They
Yes.
wrote to you,
yes.
and you wrote back to them?
And I wrote back to them. My sister basically did the writing,
And how did you feel about your service? Did you feel as if it was your duty, or did you resent being in the service? How did you feel about it?
I didn't particularly like being in the service. I thought there was a lot of things that went on there that probably shouldn't have went on. But I felt it was my duty. I was there, so I served honorably and received an honorable discharge. You know.
Now, how soon before they called you from the National Guard had you served in the National Guard?
Probably between 2 and 3 years.
So you were 2 and 3 years in the Massachusetts Army National Guard, is that
Right,
correct?
on Arlington Street in Boston.
Okay. And what did you do during those 2 years? Just meet, march?
We'd meet and march, and then I think it was 2 weeks every summer. We used to go up to Fort Drum in New York and train over there, different things. And
well, let me ask you this: if you were in the National Guard for 2 years before you were called in, didn't you? Why was it necessary for you to go through basic training after you were called in? Didn't they give you basic training in the National Guard, or was the being in the National Guard a waste of time?
Not really, because you don't really have that much other than the 2 weeks that you have. The basic training, they didn't consider that as sufficient in case we got in a war. And actually, our battalion outfit, we were told, in case the Russians attack, we were supposed to hold them off for a half hour, which would give them sufficient time to get reinforcements. And they told us that more than likely, the battalion would be wiped out by the Russians.
So you were
So
you were drafted in order to give the active troops a half an hour.
Yeah, that's what
to
they
respond.
told us.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh boy. So, do you recall your first days at Dick's when you went in there? You've already told us about the toilets.
Yeah.
And the living conditions there.
Well, we went through basic, you know, and we were on the rifle range, and I got a marksman, a sharpshooter's medal, and so forth.
You did.
And yeah, and then we went through that field wire school where we had to climb the poles. I think basic was 8 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. But people that were actually infantrymen was 16 weeks basic training.
Now, when you went to Germany, you must have come across people who did serve in the service, in the active service, before you got there, and were in combat. Do you recall any of that?
There were one or two that were in combat, and that was one of them. His name was Shazinski. He was a Polish American from Michigan, I think, or Wisconsin, and he had served in the earlier part of the Korean War. He was there, and then I think he got wounded and got shipped back, and then they shipped him to Germany. He was probably the only one that I know.
Did he talk about his experiences in Korea?
No, not really. He just told us that he had been in Korea, and he was wounded. And there were older people there, like some of the sergeants and so forth. They were probably in their 40s, so they could have been in the Second World War.
Well, how did they feel about the local people there? How did they feel about the local Germans? Did you have any discussions with them as to whether they respected them, resented them, ordered them around, or did anything like that?
No, I don't think they ordered them around. They just didn't care. They were out to have a good time. And they used to go into town and...
Okay, we're going to do a temporary stop because we see the red light blinking, and we're going to put 4 minutes. Okay, we'll put another 4 minutes on till it stops. And tell us, do you recall the day that your service ended?
Yeah, I think a lot of the people were sad and happy to see us being discharged, that we were going to go back, because some of them had longer terms that had signed on for 4 years, or whatever the reason was, or some of them may have come in afterwards.
Had you developed an esprit de corps amongst your group there?
Well, basically, in our barracks, I knew some of them, and
did you chum around with anybody in particular?
Yes, I chummed around with a friend that was from Rhode Island. His name is Robert Vaughn, and we were in the same battalion, but different companies together. I got to like him, and.
And did you go out locally with some of these other guys?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Have you ever met them when you came back? Did you ever look anybody?
Just that one, Robert Vaughn. I went to his wedding, and at the time, I was kind of a photography buff, and I took his pictures at his wedding for him in Rhode Island.
Do you have any of those? Did you keep any of those?
No.
Do you have any photography that you took while you were in the service?
Oh yeah, I got a lot of them. Shows me with the tanks and so forth.
Really?
Yeah.
We'd like to see some of those. Yeah. And so you did develop an esprit de corps amongst your own group.
Group, right? The company, yeah.
All right.
There was company A, B, C, and D. I think there were 4 companies in the battalion.
And you were in company?
I was in headquarters company.
Your headquarters company.
Which was probably company A.
Right. That's like an administrative headquarters, isn't it?
Right.
Okay. And now, when you left the service, when your service came to an end, were you given the option of staying on?
Yes, and actually, I was hurt while I was in there. I had climbed up one of the trees to lay some field wire, and of course, I did something that they told me never to do, was to let go with your left hand, hold on to the branch, even though it was about 4 inches thick. The branch broke, and I was up about 15 feet in the forest, and when I fell down, the gaff went inside my leg. I could have, but I didn't want to collect anything from them. I just wanted to leave. And they said that if you wanted to apply for medical discharge, you have to stay on another 4 or 5 days, and I didn't want to do that, so I
Okay.
didn't.
All right. So, now what forest was this that you were in? This wasn't the Black Forest, was it?
No, this was up in Hunfeld, with,
Hunfeld.
yeah, in Fulda.
Okay. We're going to just hold it here and go on to the next tape, which will end right here, and we'll go on to the next tape from this point on. Hold on just a minute.
We milked that one, you know, as much as we could of that tape.
Yeah. You got to stop?
No, it's still running.
All right. So.